All right, I gotta admit it, I really don't like painting. And that's why I try everything in my power to make it fast and less messy. To that end, I've come up with my dip and dry method. Basically, you dip the pieces in paint, you wipe off the excess, and you put them on some foil to dry. Now, you don't have to use this method if you don't want to. You can always just put it on, brush it on normally like you would with a sponge brush. But there is an advantage to this in time savings and also in the fact that the paint gets into every little nook and cranny, so your pieces are a little stronger. So let's get started. First, we're going to mix up the Quickcoat mixture, and you can use something like a salsa jar or a tomato sauce jar, or you can use the squeeze bottles from Dollar Tree, which are 2 for $1. Basically, you want to put the mixture into a container that has a tight seal on the top. If you do that, this mixture can sit around for months and you can use it over time. And it's very easy to make. It's made out of equal parts of water, Titebond, and acrylic paint. And you just put them into your vessel, whether that's your jar or one of these squeeze bottles. And you just put equal parts of the Titebond, acrylic paint, and water. And once you have all the parts in there, you're just going to seal it up tight. And I like to, on these squeeze bottles, to hold the at top of it when I shake it. And you'll notice it's not completely mixed when I finish shaking. It never really will be the first time for some reason, but that right there is good enough. That Titebond loves to cling to the sides of the squeeze bottle. And then we're going to need to protect the surface we work on because we don't want to get paint on it. The most inexpensive method that I've found is just to use some tin foil. Kind of wrap it up so it's seamed together. Now keep in mind that this is not 100% insurance that you won't get paint on the surface that is underneath the tinfoil. So if you're doing this on something you do not want to get paint on, you need to take better precautions than just a sheet of tinfoil. But since I'm doing this on top of my work surface, I don't really care if I get paint on it. So I'm going to use this tinfoil, and that'll be plenty good for me. It also makes the cleanup really easy, and since tinfoil is recyclable, since it's aluminum, I don't feel bad about putting this and throwing it away and putting it out for recycling. And then you're going to need one sponge brush, and you're just going to need your paint mixture. And I usually spray on a little bit there. You can also just pour it out of your jar if you're using a jar. And I start by thoroughly trying to get that paint in the gutters between the squares. And I do that, and I make that my priority because that is what's going to keep those squares fused together and glued onto the base. And it's super easy just to paint the top. You just really stroke it over with the sponge brush, and it takes a minute. Then I also turn the tile in a quarter turn to make sure that I didn't miss any spots. Sometimes from your point of view, it's hard to see certain areas. So just turning it to make sure you didn't miss anything is a good idea. And then we're going to set that aside to dry. Then we'll do the same procedure for the ground tile. Again, we're going to prioritize getting all those gutters thoroughly painted to make sure that we get that paint glue mixture into those seams to make sure those squares are nice and fused onto the grid square. And you'll notice you don't need a whole lot of paint. It actually spreads pretty well. Since it's sort of the consistency of, somewhere between water and milk, it flows really well and covers a whole lot of foam. You can see here, this is basically a brush that I'm just spreading what was already on the tile, and it goes a long way. And I'm going to do the same thing here that I did on the small tile. I'm going to turn it and make sure that I didn't miss any spots. Turning and looking at it from a different angle is always a good idea, because you'll find places you missed, for sure. And while these are drying, we're going to paint the other pieces. So we're going to start with making a little tub that we're going to dip the pieces into. Now I like to line it in tin foil because it makes it a lot easier to clean up later. You can use anything here. I've used disposable takeout containers from Chinese food and Thai. Anything that's going to be big enough for you to dip the 4 square wide wall in. and then you just pour in your paint glue water mixture. Now here we're making some drying racks. Basically, it's just loosely crumpled up foil. And the idea behind this is we're going to lay the pieces that are drying onto this. So what'll happen is if any paint drips off, it won't pool underneath the piece and give you a big splotchy blotch on there. It'll pool into the little crevices in our drying rack. Now, I don't like to get paint on my fingers, so what I do is I generally only dip one side and then hold the unpainted side so I get a minimal amount of paint on my fingers. And then what I'll do is I'll lay them down, have that side dry for like 30 minutes, and then I'll do the other side. Now you want to dip it and then take your sponge brush and wipe off the excess paint, making sure that the inside ridge there where all the different pieces of foam meet are well and thoroughly soaked in the paint. And you just do the same procedure for all the walls. And you'll notice there's a little bit of blotchiness on that one end of that piece. You can just go back and kind of wipe that off with your sponge brush. Sometimes you'll also notice, like a few minutes after you've laid them down to dry, you'll notice there's going to be some splotchy parts. You can just go back and wipe them, smooth them out with the sponge brush. And this is really great too. This dipping method is really great for the connectors because it really soaks up all those connection points between all the different pieces of foam, making the piece itself very durable. So after you've let these dry for about 30 minutes, they won't be completely dry, but they'll be dry enough for you to handle to dip the other areas of the pieces that you didn't get to put paint on the first time. And while those are drying, you can go ahead and start trimming off the grid tiles. And you'll notice here I'm making a little helper piece here because on this grid tile here, I want to have a border that will be 2 pieces of foam board wide. And that's because if you want to put a connector on the edge of this grid tile, you want it to be flush with the edge. Because this is a kind of a grid tile that I wouldn't put on the ground in my setups. It would probably be like the floor or a ledge in a building. And it looks best if you have the edge flush with the connectors. And you want to line up that cut, and then you're going to cut gently, several shallow strokes. And you're going to do that for each side. Just put up your little guide, make a knife mark, and then cut along the knife marks. So you can see here that since we've made that border 2 pieces of foam thick, it fits perfectly flush to the edge of our connectors. Now for our big 20-inch by 20-inch ground tile, that is going to be something that's going to sit on the table itself. So we want to make sure that if we make more ground tiles, they will fit and jut up against this ground tile really well. And it just so happens that the grid tile jig is perfect to make this mark, because if you put the grid tile jig in the gutter and then lean it over and mark at the end of the grid tile jig, that is exactly the midpoint of the grid squares. So you just put it in the groove and then lean it back so you can get an accurate mark for your cut. And the same idea here. We're just going to do gentle, multiple strokes to cut through all the foam. Now this one's going to be a little bit more to cut through because you have not only the grid squares on top and the base, but you have 2 additional sheets of foam board underneath. So make sure you go all the way through. And you'll notice that your utility knife blade will probably be completely submerged into the foam by the time you're cutting through that last piece of foam board underneath. And same thing. You're going to put the jig into the grooves, lean it so you can get that mark just right. And then cut along your marks. And there you go. Now you have a border on the outside that's half the width of a grid square. And now we're going to paint the underside and the edges of our grid square. Why paint the underside? It seals both sides of the tile so they degas at roughly the same rate, which means that they won't warp. And then do the same to the floor tile, painting the backside and the edges. And after this, you can also touch up all your wall and connector pieces, the parts that you had not painted yet. Now, the nice thing about using this foil liner is you can make a little spout, like a little funnel, to pour back any of the paint that you didn't use. It makes it easy cleanup and quick, and then all you need to do is recycle the aluminum foil and you're done. And then for painting the door, I'll usually do like a nice kind of accent color. And usually for these accent colors, I'll mix up a lot less than I will for things that are going to cover up entire walls and grid tiles. So I'll use these small squeeze bottles, or I'll also use like a small salsa jar. And you can get 3 of these squeeze bottles for $1 at Dollar Tree. And then after I'm done painting, I can just pour back what I haven't used into the squeeze bottle, seal it up tight, and it's ready for use down the line. So if you haven't already, you can get started right now on your Terraino journey by downloading the Terraino construction manuals at GameGearMaster.com. They are consistently rated 5 stars and come with a 14-day hassle-free money-back guarantee. That means if Terraino's not for you, no problem. You'll get your money back, no questions asked. Happy crafting.